Hello, good morning. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar covering the role of technology in high security and government accredited control rooms. In today's webinar, we'll be discussing how technology can be used to consolidate information and be integrated into secure processes, along with some real-world examples. I'm delighted that today we're joined by Barco, one of the technology providers that Bedrock partner with on some of our client projects. Don't feel like you need to make notes or take it all in straight away, as we'll be sending out a recording of the webinar later today. Also, if you have any questions, please do feel free to drop those into the Q&A box at the side at any time, and there will also be a dedicated time for questions at the end of the webinar. So let's take a look at the agenda that we'll be covering today. Just going to start off with a quick welcome and introduction to Bedrock and Barco, for those of you who may not have heard of us before. Then we'll be looking at the technology behind the solution. How are other organisations tackling the challenge? This is where we'll be looking at some real-world scenarios of projects that perhaps we've already worked on. We'll also be looking at ways of enabling better, faster decision-making in your organisation. Finally, as I said, we'll be taking some time to take some questions from you, just in case you've got any questions that you'd like to address to our experts while they're here, and we'll be happy to answer those for you. So let's start with a welcome. My name's Jennifer Benge and I'm the marketing manager at Bedrock. Bedrock is an IT managed service provider. We're also experts in secure, resilient networks and managed IT solutions where high performance is critical. So we work with organisations that have some of the highest security requirements in the UK. We also help organisations that rely on technology for their critical operations. We help them to achieve and maintain a high-performance environment. We partner with Barco on projects that require secure control room visualization and collaboration solutions. I'm really pleased that we're joined today by Jordan Heldrich and Stavros Theodoros. Sorry, Stavros there, slipped on your name. As well as Bedrock's own senior technical architect, Michael Crabtree. Between them, they're going to talk you through the secure control room technology that's available and give you some insights and use cases showing how we have implemented this technology in the real world. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Jordan to talk you through the Barco technology.
Thanks, Jennifer. Let me start sharing. All right, are you guys all able to see my screen?
Yep, that's great.
Perfect, thanks. Hi, my name is Jordan Heldrich, and I am the Segment Marketing Manager for Control Rooms at Barco. And today I wanted to talk to you guys about the role of technology in high security control rooms, specifically about government control rooms, as well as control rooms for critical operations and infrastructure. All right, so the first thing I wanted to start with was actually where we started with different technologies so that we could sort of see where we are today and how we got to some of the different technology needed for the control rooms. So if you take a look at the top left-hand corner, you're able to see an older control room that looks fairly dated, but in its time it was state-of-the-art. And with it, the control room was, or the operator was able to see different information based on the different lights as well as gauges, and then use the controls below. And so the first major technology advancement is the digitization of content. And I know we've all heard a lot about digitization and digital transformation, but they're two completely different things. So the digitization part is actually taking all of that information and putting it into a digital format. So you see below the digitization of content image shows all of the same information plus more now in a digital form. So some of it looks similar as much as the map sort of above, but with the digitization of content also became more technology in how we can actually gather that information. So a lot of the data became able to be available more frequently, also to more precise amounts, so possibly more decimal points, as well as in different formats. So we have them also now available on maps you can sort of see on one of the screens, as well as charts, trends, and normal data points. And so with all of this information coming through to the operator, he had a lot more information to be absorbing. So Most of the time now we refer to this as all of the big data that's around him and constantly bombarding him. Now, all of this has been great for us to be able to make sure we're providing operators with all of the information they need to make the best decisions, but they need a way to actually now change their workflows to be able to utilize all this information. And that's where the digital transformation part comes in, where you actually need to incorporate some sort of technology into the operator's workflow so that they're changing how they work by using technology. And this is also where in control rooms, we've split off into a lot of different directions on how we can tackle this and where we should tackle this within the workflow. So I chose this picture because this is a fairly wide acceptable form of digital transformation where you can sort of see that the operator is using a mouse. But if you look right to his left on the keyboard above it, there's a small touch screen. And that touch screen is now a digital interface of new technology that the operator is able to use and manipulate to go through and do his work. So this is, again, a form of technology being brought into the operator's workflow to help him in his everyday. So this was one of the first ones that I started to see more and more within the control room that is widely accepted, whereas other ones start to get a little bit iffy. And that's because a lot of people feel about the security issues. And as soon as people talk about bringing in new technologies as well as changing different workflows, the security aspect always comes up within control rooms because we need to make sure that all of the control rooms are still secure and locked down with all of their information. But when we do that, it also starts to hinder the ability of the operators to actually utilize all of that information that we're now able to give them through technology. So it sort of needs to be this balancing act. And this is where new softwares have started to be developed and new technologies across the board specifically for control rooms so that we're able to utilize the technology that is already widely used in our everyday life, but in a much more secure way so that the operators are also able to utilize it in their everyday workflows. So one of the first things that people get concerned about with this security are the different sources. And so we'll talk first about one way we can help keep the sources secure, and that's even just with who's able to see these sources. So I have here an example of John, who is a user, and we can actually assign him different access roles or permissions to make sure that he's able to see only the sources he needs. So in this, he could be in operator group 1, operator group 2, or the managers, and you can see that once you're in a certain role or a group of roles together, that you are able to assign specific sources for that group. Now, certain groups can also see several of the same source. So group 1, group 2, and the managers in this example are able to all see source 1, whereas only the managers are able to see source 5. And so this can also help if you only have certain people who are allowed to see certain information. And so a lot of times we see this the most in classified different sources for government use, but we can also see this in critical infrastructure in other ways. So sometimes also for different shifts, if different sources or applications are more prevalent during the day versus night, or if certain sites only need to see certain information versus others. But when this becomes really handy is when we're having emergency situations. A lot of times we see a lot of different groups come together to help solve the problem very quickly in these two different types of control rooms, government and critical infrastructure, because there's so much at risk when a crisis situation is going on that it's more all hands on deck. And so you can see sort of here, it's a little bit small in the picture, but we have the fire department, the medical department, as well as the decontamination officers, all sort of working together. And it's a situation like this where in the background, the control room operators from the different departments may need to start sharing different sources for a period of time, maybe a couple hours, maybe a few days to be able to get all of this information and make the best decisions. And then again, be able to separate back off. And so adding different access roles and permissions helps do this a lot easier because you can change them on the fly as needed, as well as keep them separated. So this is one way that you're able to lock down that information of the different sources and applications just based on who can see it. Another situation that comes up with the different sources and applications is the security needed for them themselves. So when I talk about that, I mean all of the different applications a lot of times need their own isolated network to be able to operate. So let's take a look at this picture on the left. We can see here we have an operator on the far left who has 3 different monitors and keyboards on his desk, as well as right here sort of in the center. And they have these as an example, or I'm showing them as an example, because in this control room, they each needed to have their own isolated network for each of the different applications. So what they were doing was adding on a different computer and monitor and keyboard and mouse for each different application and source situation they needed to bring in. And this, as you can see from here, was already getting a little bit crowded. If they needed to add in a new desk, the operator on the or a new monitor and PC, the operator on the far left would have a lot of issues being able to just have the space to add that in. We also come up with the issue of being able to see all of this information easily and have access to it. You can see they're both very focused on one monitor. So the application that's 2 monitors over is very hard for them to have a visualization if an alarm goes off, or if they need to actually be using that information in an emergency where they constantly have to be turning their head over for that. So there was a new software developed so that we would be able to have all that information directly in front of our operators. And you can see that here on the right. They have 1 keyboard and mouse to control it. And this new software is able to actually keep all of our different applications and sources separated out on its own network in isolation and just being able to be shown as 1 pixel screen. So all of these monitors are basically acting as if they were 1 big screen, and you're able to design your own view of how you need to see these sources, even though that they're next to each other on the same monitor. They're still being completely separated and keeping network isolation. So this can help when you need to add in a new source. So here you can see in the 3rd monitor over, we have several different sources on 1 screen, versus you could also just choose to have 1 large monitor have the entire source shown. But again, it gives that operator some of the flexibility to do what they need to and have that information directly in front of them, since it's all being controlled by that 1 mouse and 1 keyboard. So it's also easier to then add those new ones in, because as we're developing new technologies specifically for the control room, there's also new technologies, again, being developed in all of our specified applications for energy and utilities or government. And we don't want to have to limit what we can bring into the control room because of space or because of the amount that the operator can have actually in its plane of sight. We can start rearranging things to make sure that everything is up to date and giving the operator the best way to absorb all of that information. So this new technology or software that is demonstrated here is OpSpace, and you can see it in this picture here again. And with this, you can also see a little bit better how some of the screens are broken up into 4 different quadrants. And one way that this software also works is by giving you 1 workspace, so that you can have all of your information that you need to be interacting with directly in front of you, bringing it into that workspace, as well as then pushing it back out to the sides when you need it. So it gives you the flexibility, and the operators really the advantage of having everything at their fingertips very quickly in the case of an emergency. Again, it's also being able to be extremely secure so that the isolation of all the different networks of any of the applications are being able to be used. And you can see here a little bit better that you're also able to use those different kinds of content that have now come up with all of the big data, whether it's graphs, maps, images, videos, all of this can then be brought through on this software. And that really helps those operators be able to change their workflow by bringing all the information to them and making sure they don't miss things that are farther away because it's out of their view. Or I've even seen where it's, 7 monitors down the line, and you actually have to roll down in your chair to be able to see that information. And we want to eliminate all of that to make sure that we're giving those operators the tools to be able to make those decisions quickly. Now, again, the big concern is always security and how these different softwares can open up different areas for possible cyber attacks. And luckily with OpSpace, we've been able to conduct our own different tests, but also with government and a lot of these critical infrastructure control rooms, they have their own vulnerability tests and penetration tests that they like to hire out and have done to make sure that they are able to maintain their same security level. And so with all of those different third-party tests, OpSpace has been able to pass them. Now, as most of you know, you're not able to actually share some of that information back. Otherwise, that can sort of be considered then the liability, as we know exactly what you're looking for, and that could leak out. So we don't get the full test back, but at least we're hearing that each time we are passing those, and we're willing to help any of our partners or end users go through and continue to test those to make sure that our end users and partners feel secure before putting these into any of the systems. Another way also is from the different references. And again, to respect the customer's privacies, we don't want to name any names, but we've been able to put in OpSpace across all different levels of government, from different police as well as local governments as well as national agencies. And these have gone in several different countries on all of the different continents we've seen across. Well, except Antarctica, but everywhere else. And that's the same with critical infrastructure, where we've also been able to put in OpSpace in power and utility plants, refineries, and chemical plants. And so some of these different groups have decided to do their own different tests, or just speaking with us privately on where else we've put it in. But being able to constantly hear the feedback that we are able to maintain our security levels has been very promising and helpful for us to continue to develop different control room technologies, specifically helping the operator's workflow, because we want to continue to use these new technologies to make sure that those operators are best equipped to handle all the information they're brought with today. So with that, I think we're going to hear about a little case example for it. So I'll bring it back to Jennifer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jordan. I'm just going to get our presentation ready, and next we'll be hearing from Michael Crabtree, who is a senior technical architect here at Bedrock. So over to you, Michael.
Thank you, Jenny. So yes, we're going to look at 2 scenarios. I think Jordan kind of very briefly mentioned 2 kind of scenarios or areas of business that would benefit from this technology. And the first one is CNI, or critical national infrastructure. And that's things like power stations and all those types of things. We'll look at a few specific examples shortly. So the main challenge in these types of areas that they can be lots of different separate systems, and that can be for a number of reasons, such as different asset ownership in the UK. Sometimes they have to be by law separate asset ownership by different companies or people, OFTOs and WFOs. Or the simply separate systems that don't use IT or network communications, that may still use serial comms, for example, to PLCs, that type of thing. So separate systems such as SCADA, metrology, even corporate networks that exist on those sites, often requiring separate HMIs with their own screens, keyboards, mice, often made worse and exacerbated by having maybe central monitoring. So instead of having a monitoring per site, there would be a central one as well. And you can see in the image there, this is kind of an example of a single site, and you can see there's a screen pretty much for every operation that the plant has. This is a real one, and there's a keyboard and a mouse and a screen for every single thing that they need to access. So if we have a quick look at kind of what that might look like in terms of improving that. So this is an example where we've got a central operations center, but it would still be applicable if you had an operations center at each of your sites. The two examples at the bottom are something like, say, a light managed site. You may have 1 or 2 people monitoring that site on site. Sometimes it may have nobody there. Click over a minute, just 1 second. Yeah, so these might be wind farms. They may be other such things such as so gas turbine electric plants in the UK, often called distributed generation. And they can have these different systems. And what we can do is we can connect up multiple encoders, which is what Barco kind of use, up to their control computers and PCs. And in an unmanaged scenario, these may even be able to put in a data center instead of sat on tables. And we are able to use a WAN in this case to, or whatever type of connection, whether that's internet, whether that's whatever direct connectivity that you would use to connect into these systems. And we will be able to have, maybe 1 or 2 different operations desks dealing with either a number of sites or a single site, whichever that you guys want to do. That's where the versatility really comes in. I've also got an example of a completely unmanaged site, like a battery site, with it's something that that is starting to become more prevalent in the UK, where are looking in greener areas. Electricity can't be stored in terms of AC, so having these battery storage sites where energy, when it's made, can be stored so that it can then take the peaks and troughs that exist when people are using electricity. And these are often unmanaged, and therefore being able to have good, clear access of these sites, not just of these sites, but globally across all your sites is very useful. And if we look at one of the examples there, we can see things such as network management. We can look at our meteorological systems, because again, wind farms, you're going to be wanting to connect to assets that are also potentially offshore as well. SCADA systems, and also your telephony and security as well, if you do have those on there, such as CCTV. Maybe you have got telephony on the site, and we're able to look at those and access them globally all at once, as John has shown in a couple of her slides. And again, with the battery sites, similar sorts of things. We may have other things such as metering systems, connections to national grid, all those types of things that are all separate, and we're able to see them all in one single pane and able to make decisions and look at things globally, as opposed to looking at each individual thing individually. So if we take a look at maybe another scenario, which is around government, law enforcement, cybersecurity, those types of things, whereby the challenges would be that you would have different systems or networks, and these are potentially of different security levels, and therefore you'd be prohibited from connecting them together, even from a management perspective, making a connection for, say, accessing security logs, all those types of things that maybe cybersecurity individuals need to be able to see and see globally, so they can make effective decisions on things happening. So yeah, again, managing and monitoring systems, it would have required multiple PCs, and they can cloud the overall visibility when you're managing and monitoring different systems in a NOC or a SOC. If we have a look at maybe how this might work. So at the moment, this is just an example where we may have a couple of secure networks. One may be it may even just be a file system. So for example, network security one may be just a filing system where you hold official sensitive data, official sensitive files, those types of things. And we've got some kind of SOC monitoring access to that, with, again, at the bottom there, just a PC of some description in a network operations center, or in this case, more of a SOC, a security operations center. There's small differences. The other secure network may be something entirely different. Could be absolutely anything, whatever you've got. Maybe it's some secure CCTV, maybe whatever that is. And you traditionally wouldn't be able to connect any of these up together. And we're always, most of the time now, people need day-to-day access to some kind of corporate resources, whether that's email, access to some kind of internet, and those types of things. And again, all these logs, access logs, sys logs, information from firewalls, switches, email, whatever it is, are going into some kind of central server. And we've got corporate users, whatever they're doing, delivered into that. And at the bottom of that, we've still got our NOC and SOC or NMS, network management system workstations. And you can see here, this is just an example where there may be 3 of those, each with multiple screens. And in terms of an attack vector, some people may say, there may be different ways that people try to come in. They may attack what might be the simplest first. That will give them enough information to potentially get into the others, and therefore being able to globally see what's going on across those three systems in this case effectively, and may be able to see patterns and make effective decisions can be made easier if, as Jordan says, you're not rolling up and down a chair across multiple systems, trying to understand and work out what's going on. So in terms of consolidating that, if we just have a quick look at the next slide, that will show us something pretty similar to the other one, but some subtle differences here. You may have 1, 2, 3, however many desk spaces with cybersecurity engineers or network engineers globally overseeing what they're allowed to see as part of RBAC, as has been mentioned before. Connecting to these different networks, looking at all of the logs either within a quad view, and again being able to quickly make that bigger, interact with that system and put it back again, being able to make decisions. One of the biggest things to look at here is around that connectivity and security, as we said, really important with that. So one of the biggest things that people look at is, well, actually I've got PCs that are all connecting to all of these different encoders, and traditionally with other types of air gapping, as it's called, that may be something a bit more analog. In a video world, that might be BNC, for example, so it may be coax, and obviously we're still making some kind of potentially digital connection. So it's really important that is looked at and considered, as that's our connection point onto the system. So for that, if we just have a look at the next slide there's a couple of things that we consider from a security perspective with that. One of them is the video connection. So using things such as DVI or VGA still, not HDMI. Bear in mind that HDMI can carry Ethernet in the form of HEC, other types of discovery connections as well. So they actually will go out and purposefully discover to see if there's other devices that they're connected to have Ethernet channels and been able to connect those up. It's all part of that, and that's all there. So moving to a different video, maybe DVI, so we can still maintain good quality, or VGA depending on your system. The barcode encoder that's pictured does support all of those. Actually, it has 4 inputs in total in terms of DVI into DisplayPort. It does have HDMI for those people that it's less of a consideration. Obviously, VGA as part of the DVI connection. So there's those things to consider. The other one is the USB itself. By its very nature, it's got two-way communication. And for those types of things, it's one of those things we look at is a thing called a KVM protector, some kind of a data diode, because we can control the data in terms of USB, add other security things. You can see here we're still connecting the video up to that. The reason for doing that is this device can take the ID. So video uses the thing EDID, which does certain things with computers, allows them to know what resolution your screen's got, for example. That really simple thing where you choose the resolution of your screen and it knows what your screen can do. That type of information is used in that. And what things like these KVM protectors can do is they can understand what that is, lock it in, and then if somebody were to say change something out or try and bypass it, it will see that change and then it will lock out that connectivity. So they will do things like that. But the main reason for this is also USB, so we can control access and make sure that that two-way comms that does exist in the USB protocol is controlled. So yeah, that's a couple of scenarios. Obviously, there's other things like CCTV as well, whereby you may have your main viewing systems, but we know in some worlds that sometimes they'll have ancillary viewing systems. Maybe they're brought in a different way and have their own specific software that doesn't really lend itself to be brought into your main viewing platforms, and therefore being able to consolidate that in as well. So instead of having your CCTV system, but then this bunch of laptops at the side, for example, and all connected to bigger screens and all that kind of thing, you can lock those away, put them into something like this, and just have all of your existing CCTV along with these other ancillary things all brought into one space. So it also has some great applications in there as well. So I think that concludes some of those. So I'll hand back to Jenny, and we'll have a look and take some questions.
Thanks very much, Michael. That was a bit of a whistle-stop tour of some scenarios where we could use this kind of technology. Obviously, we're doing our best not to betray any confidences, but
Yes.
we do use this technology on a lot of our projects. So we do have a lot of information about how these can work in the real world, and obviously it's very adaptable to the scenario that each individual organisation is looking at. As Michael said, we do have some time for some questions now. So if you do have any questions that you'd like to ask to either Michael or Jordan, please do feel free to publish those into the question box at the side of the screen where you're viewing. There will be a little time for that. I've actually got a question for you, Jordan, based on some of the stuff that you covered earlier. Is there a technology that can help with the redundancy for operator workflows that you'd be able to tell us about?
Yes, actually, OpSpace is also able to help with that. So when you have your own operator system with OpSpace, what you're able to do is create your own login. And with that, you can actually put in your own specific layout, and that can actually follow you to another operator workstation. Now, that layout that you can create can either be created by your managers or by yourself and locked in, and each time that is saved. And so if we'll say a monitor or a keyboard or something was breaking on your actual operator workstation, it's a quick and easy just login at a new OpSpace desk to make sure that you're up and running instead of having to try to fix whatever has broken and or try to transfer some of what you need over to a new desk. It can all be done just with a simple login. And so a lot of people also use OpSpace for a redundancy station so that no matter what, they're covered. And even now we saw a little bit in the pandemic, people using that in a new location in the building so that people could also keep isolated and keep separated out. Thanks.
Great, thank you. The other thing that was covered earlier, just I wondered if you could explain what you mean by easy collaboration on the side.
Yes, so with OpSpace, a lot of times you're able to actually share some of those different sources across all of the different operator workstations. So usually when you're having to keep out those different applications on their separate networks, that means it's only coming in to one operator workstation, or you have to set the entire thing up somewhere else as well. And with OpSpace, you're actually, when you're able to view all the different sources, and so when you're creating that layout, there's just a menu box where you can select the different sources. So if I needed to talk to, say you, Jennifer, about some of the sources, I would be able to ask you to pull up and add that source in, as long as you have the access to it, and then we'd be able to collaborate about it instead of having you come over to my desk or try to figure out how to get that new information over to your operator station. So it's a quick and easier way to start collaborating right off the bat when everybody can quickly add in the information and also see the exact same thing. It doesn't have to be a snapshot, but they can be the live viewings both at the same time. So that helps a lot with collaboration these days, especially between the different departments and also with management as they go from one place to another.
Thank you. Yeah, we're seeing that a lot. I mean, not even just in terms of this technology, but when different technologies are completely siloed, it makes collaboration so much harder. So allowing that collaboration to take place just improves efficiencies everywhere. Michael, you mentioned air gapping. In terms of, obviously that's a really high security way to use this technology. Are there any other benefits to the organisation for why they might implement that kind of system rather than something, you know, are the alternatives more complicated perhaps?
I think that obviously in terms of that set of connectivity, it's probably the fact that obviously the alternatives are to keep it all separate, really, isn't it? You know, it's where are you making the connection? Because, you know, they're all separate systems, but at some point we are making a connection, and we have to look and assess where those connections are and how best to deal with them. So in terms of alternatives, obviously, again, it's looking at the overall security wrap around all the different things. It may be that things aren't quite as the need for that may not just just may not be needed just because of the type of networks it is, and we're doing it for a functionality and overview point of view. But within a cybersecurity connection arena, if you've got the ability to send signals, say down a USB to another device, then that's something that needs to be considered. And therefore, a lot of that type of thing, we worked really well with some of our both our clients and our partners in terms of understanding what that is and analyzing that data that could reside on a HDMI cable, for example, or a USB cable, and how do we mitigate against that.
So do you find that often clients reach a certain breaking point where they have been using separate systems for a long time, and then it's time to make that change?
I think so. Yeah, definitely. I think that's kind of something that sometimes it creeps up on people, doesn't it? So what happens is you'll get a system in, and it's that kind of migration or build over time, where you'll have a system in for doing something, then you'll pull in another thing to do something else. Then it's only really at your as you say, like maybe that breaking point or something where suddenly you've got all these things sat in front of you and you think, wow, okay, there's a lot of information to digest. There's a lot where, like you say, that thing where you may have 2 or 3 people crowded around this system, and there's something that's happening, and you've got to then they've all got to move to this one, and that ability to like you say, that breaking point where you go, okay, we need to do something about that. We need to make that easier. We need to make it more collaborative. We need to be able to have a better access that's globally more visible across these different systems. So yeah, I would say definitely, and it is that it kind of creeps upon you, I think.
Great, thank you. So we haven't had any other questions pop in for now, but please do feel free to reply to the email that you'll get later today if you do think of a question that you would like to ask to one of our experts. I will be sending out the recording later today, so if something comes to mind, please do feel free to just reply to that email, and we'll make sure someone gets back to you with the answer. So I'd just like to say thank you again to Jordan Heldrich from Barco for joining us, and to Michael Crabtree, our technical expert. Really pleased to see so many of you joined us today, and look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.